about Tories.
You didn't realise that, so I just go like just in the middle of you saying that. Boards. Board games, it's what we're talking about. Board games, I'm not gonna shout. Over to this side of me is the person known as Benji. Benji is working on a game, and Damnation, the Gothic Game, I believe, is its name. We've not talked about this game before, but it is a game of old yore. It is what you might call a remake, and that is why I have decided to take that as, or maybe it was Benji who came with that idea for a topic, and I thought, yeah, this could be sick, and now we are here talking as two, and we are going to be talking in front of you about board games and remaking old board games is what we're talking about. Board games and remaking old board games. I'm not going to shout. Hello and good morning, everyone.
I feel like this is where I fit in, right? Good morning. How are you?
Yeah, I'm generally. I could be worse. Let's put it that way. No matter how bad things are, they can always be worse. I'm not wanting to make a big thing of it. I put something up on my Instagram. Some people mistakenly thought I was going to hospital. Just to clarify that I am not in hospital. I am in the house. I did have to go to hospital yesterday, but that was for someone in my immediate family. It is not for me. Hopefully they are okay. And that is all I want to say about that. And
glad you're okay.
Yeah. And hopefully everyone else will be. And hello, Xate, it is lovely to see you. Hello, Nicholas, it is lovely to see you. And Benji, just to make sure, in case the internet goes down, make sure that you've got the public comments open, so you should be able to see this on the right-hand side of your screen with the comments tab. And then people can just ask you questions, because Xate and Nicholas and everyone were wonderful at filling in for my questions. And Jessica was the most amazing person at filling in for the blathering side of things. And thank you very much. I assume that's Kelly Lee, although it might also be Ben, I would say, but it's lovely to hear you. Aww. But yeah, carrying on, I am Bez, of course. It is bath time, in that if you want to take a bath, you always have that prerogative. I mean, nowadays, we're all working from home, so frankly, if in the middle of your working day, as long as you're not in the middle of a meeting, frankly, maybe even if you're on camera, maybe people would be okay with it. Like, turn the camera off, maybe just make sure that it's showing your face, depending on whether you can get your phone to not land into the water, although I know some phones are even waterproof. But you can take a bath time whenever you want. That is the world we live in as of January 2021. But regardless, we are blathering about board games, and today discussing remaking a game, as I said. So what is this topic, and why did you suggest it, Benji, quickly?
Okay, so I work for a company called BlackLetter Games, and we are remaking a game, a classic game called the Gothic Game, which is an old game from the 90s that's been around since the 60s. And we're basically taking this classic game and we're basically injecting all the love that we have for this game and bringing it right up to date. And I thought there's something really interesting that we aren't talking about in the industry, about how there's this new resurgence for classic and important games that are well loved to us as a community that are starting to slowly get remade, not just reprinted, but remade. We have big companies like Restoration Games who are starting to put out some really big projects. But that's not the first time that's happening. And I think it's really interesting because we're in this world of movies that have been remade forever. And board games are starting to doing it increasingly more. And I think it's something really interesting that we aren't talking about enough. And it's also something that's awesome because it means that we can get more copies of things that we love, and we can shine the edges up and polish up the old things that we hold near and dear that don't necessarily hold up to our nostalgia.
Now, there's like lots of bits that people be like, well, if you take it away, it's not quite the same thing. And I'm thinking particularly of Star Wars. Like, there's been a lot of, I honestly don't have an opinion about it. I've not even watched, I think I've watched 6 and maybe 2 halves of the Star Wars films. I know that sounds weird.
It does.
But you know, one of them was on TV, so I saw most of it. The other one was on something else. I might have fallen asleep during a bit of one of them, I'm not going to lie. It was very late. I was working a night shift, and so, yep, anyway. But I know there's a lot of furore about George Lucas changed this and George Lucas changed that, and how dare people do this? And I know there's always going to be people who want the original version of Fireball Island, even though the new versions, to my mind at least, clearly better, because it's actually, you've got the chaos of the big thing tumbling down, you've got more excitement. I mean, how can you say, dear, anyway, but yeah, and there's always going to be people who appreciate the original films, people who appreciate the fact that a stormtrooper hits their head, which I was reading about not too long ago, and I was like, you know, that's quite cool. And then in one of the scenes, I'm sure that lots of people here are aware, you can actually see in the background one of the stormtroopers, maybe the actor was just a bit taller, and then they hit their head, and then it's kept in for the final film. And people are going to fall in love with that sorts of stuff. But even if it's changing wee bits and shining around the edges, and I know obviously Tinner's Trail just came out on Kickstarter with Alley Cat Games, who I did used to do some paid work for, so there is a little bit of a bias there. But I've had Martin Wallace on the show, and good people. And these, sorry, I'm just going to turn this off because put that onto airplane mode. Sorry, I don't know if anyone was able to hear any buzzing coming through. But yeah, with Tinner's Trail, it feels like, hey, here's a game that was classic. I really enjoyed the way that the water cubes make it more costly to get the ore out. So every time you go in, you need to be as efficient as you can. And I think that's just such a genius mechanism. Now, I've not played the new version. I'm not going to pass any judgment on that. But what I can say is that I think it's great that here's a great game, and let's remake it for a new audience. And yeah, if we can add a solo mode, if we can add a 2-player mode, then as long as those modes are all good, then all the better. And updating the graphics, making it even better, and giving it the real love and attention that it deserves. Because obviously, after a few years, you're always able to make something a wee bit better.
Yeah, I mean, our times change, right? Our sensibilities for what we want as a community, and popular trends, not just in mechanics, but also in art, for example, change considerably. I think they sort of become different products, right? Oh dear. Your chat is incredible, Bez.
And good morning to Alex, and good morning to Rob. Lovely to see you. But yeah, don't be distracted by me flashing things up.
Yeah, what I was saying was, I think it's interesting that it sort of creates a secondary product, doesn't it? It becomes a different thing that is inspired by the original. You were saying about making considerable changes. It means that you have this sort of older version which can have imperfections in it, and then a newer version that can potentially be perfect. But some people want the imperfections. I've been playing a lot of Gloomhaven over the last few years with my gaming group, and there's a card in one of the decks as you're traveling that has a typo in it that asks you to kill an monster rather than kill a monster. And whenever that comes up, that's just we have this memic thing where the group will always be, oh, you need to go and kill an monster. Please go and kill an monster. And I wouldn't want that to be corrected. If they reprinted or remade their game, they would take out those typos. But I appreciate that I enjoy that as a fan for the crunchy, incorrect parts. And I think it's interesting that any reprint of that would become a sort of different product. It looks the same, but it's not the same.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. It's kind of falling in love with wee mistakes. And you might almost say, hey, this monster's name is Anne. And so this is
Exactly.
a special type of monster. And this is not just any monster. This is Anne Monster,
Yeah.
the angry netherworld monster or something. Oh,
Yeah.
poor Anne Monster.
Yeah.
Just and so people can, yeah, let's actually take a wee step back, because we've given people an idea of what we're talking about. That is going to be coming up later today. We are going to get more into that. But first of all, let's talk about recent highlights, playing games and other delights, recent highlights, living life and seeing the sights, recent highlights. So what have everyone's recent highlights been? Let me know in the chat. Or Benji, you can feel free to share. What have you been up to in the past couple of weeks?
So I have two very exciting things. One of which is going to sound very pluggy, so I'll get that over the way. We've been working on some new cards. We've had some cards, some card art commissioned, which I will tease, and I'm very, very excited by. Our artist was able to pump through over Christmas, and basically in 2 weeks we got a huge swath of cards back. So we were hugely excited that we were able to get all this exciting artwork that we just desperately were hoping we would be able to get created in time. So that's been a big highlight for me. The second thing is I've been playing Pandemic Legacy Season 0. I'm a massive Pandemic Legacy fan. I'm a big Legacy fan. I love Rob Davio's stuff.
Nice.
And Pandemic Legacy Season 0 for me has been, it's been a heck of an experience. The idea of taking a game and making a prequel to it and changing what the game is about, but keeping the core mechanics has been amazing. I love really well-made physical components, and the game has passports in it, physical passports where you photo fit characters together, and that's just been a game changer for me. Like it was so exciting to be able to especially play something that's a campaign game after so long. Being able to get that on the table was really, really satisfying. So that's been a massive highlight for me. How about you?
That sounds awesome. I'm going to give a shout out to Xate in the chat, who sent off some chocolate to Aquasulis, also in chat, and Alex got it, and now you can see photos of it in Xate's Instagram, which is literally pictures of Alex playing the ukulele and a picture of one of the LDEC cards. I'll show it up tomorrow, but it is gorgeous. I really enjoyed that. And apparently Rob said no. So yeah, there's been some confusion over what. I think maybe Rob's regretting saying no now. Because but anyway,
wait, it's not chocolate art, it's chocolate, right?
Chocolate.
Chocolate?
Chocolate. Art chalk. Anyway, I don't know. Xate can. Yep, your loss. I will. Choco art says Xate. Xate is doing it, so Xate should decide. There we go. Chocolat.
Oh, chocolat is good. That one's good. That might be the best.
So my highlights were, even though having to go to the hospital to get in something for someone who's staying overnight isn't great, I was quite impressed by how they were doing this non-contact handover. So I had this bag of stuff, and then I put it into a transparent bag in a bucket. So like I didn't touch the top of the bag, if you know what I mean. It was just out. It was a big bag over a bucket. So I just put it in, and then presumably they're going to tie that up, touching the bits that no one's touched, the bits of the bag that are over the bucket, and then take it up to the patient. And it's really nice that there's nothing coming in from outside that is going to be touched by these people who are transporting things to the patients. And whilst it's slightly heart-wrenching having someone, just a couple of floors up and you can't see them, but it at least are doing good precautions for viral contamination. So that was a good thing. Oh yeah, I did read Usagi Ojimbo, I got a new book of that not too long ago. I got it about a week ago. I had it just sitting in the hallway, and I was told, if you know what it is and you don't need it right now, just leave it so that, it's a bit safer, and go and wash your hands. And so I did that. And today, yesterday I was feeling a bit down. I read through this new book of Isagio Jimbo. To be fair, there's been quite a few books, and it's just such masterful storytelling. I might talk a wee bit more about that on the Sunday. But those were my recent highlights. Also, walking outside in the snow today. Snow has fallen again, and yep, it's completely covered in snow, although lots of it's mushy.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm very jealous.
It's a bit cold and miserable, and by the end of today, it's just going to be all slidey mush and wet and ice again. So we'll see. But if anyone else has any recent highlights or achievements or anything else that they want to share, even if it's just something nice that you ate, then let us know. And yeah, to be fair, Xate is saying that I did not get any chocolate because I have to go to Germany to get it. Let's move on to the brilliant thing. What's the little thing which is brilliant? Now, I think it makes sense to talk about, given the topic of today's things, do you think nostalgia is a brilliant thing?
Oh, that's a really big question. I'm going to make a sweeping statement, and I'm going to say I think it's a brilliant thing because I think it makes us happy. I think there's a cynical part of me that really hates it because I hate how much we milk it and companies milk it. But I do think it makes us very happy. There is something lovely about nostalgically looking through old photos or going and revisiting a place that you went to when you're a teenager, or those things evoke those lovely, warm, comforting memories. There's something lovely about that. Oh, that's good, Harbour Rob. That's really
nostalgia
good.
Isn't as brilliant as it used to be, says Rob. I like what you're saying, and so I'm going to allow nostalgia as a brilliant thing because, yeah, it's the enjoyment of the past, even if the past isn't perfect. And I think that's ideally, we should be able to appreciate the imperfections of the past. Let's not idealize the past. Let's not put it on a pedestal just because it's affected us at a time that, let's be honest and sincere, and let's say, look, round here, by the Counting Crows, it's a great song. But part of the reason that I love that song so much is because this was the first band that it came at a place where I was really able to fall in love with their music. Hadn't really had a band that I followed everything of theirs at all, and sometimes you just want someone to latch onto, do you know what I mean? And so I went in head first. I bought all their albums, and I got all their singles that I could, and I got even the bootleg albums, because then you hear the live recordings that you don't actually get to hear if you just go for the legit sources. And so, yeah, I've got probably about 30 shows of theirs, none of which are available on Spotify or anything like that.
Oh, that's very cool.
And I do appreciate how the Counting Crows played that music with a wide, they change it and they mutate it, and they are a great band, but at the same time, remember why it's affected you, because you were a different person. And for sure, if they came right now, maybe they wouldn't be as great. And look, the Beatles were brilliant. I'm not going to deny that. But if the Beatles were here today, the Beatles were not perfect by any means. I'm not going to say they are beyond reproach. Nothing is beyond reproach. And I think that's the basic thing that we should bear in mind when we think about the past. That's the slight caveat that I want to get into.
I think that's quite an interesting discussion about, particularly with bands, is like the idea that bands themselves change too. Like if you have a band who've been going for like 20 years, they aren't the same now as they were when you first started liking them years and years ago. And you find often that there'll be the two sides. You have a band who change direction quite significantly multiple times, and sometimes people dislike that. Or you have a band who stay exactly the same, and you find that You have an album, album after album after album that is absolutely identical, because people want that nostalgia to be exactly where I was when I was 17. I need exactly that same album again, but just more of it, please. But nothing quite scratches that itch, I don't think. Like you say, it's about trying to retain what made it special in the first place.
Have you listened to the new T for the Tillerman album? By Cat Stevens? So it's really interesting because you've got multiple versions. So one of them, it's basically exactly like the same, but they've just maybe played with the audio levels marginally to try and remaster it. Then they've got another version where, oh no, it's like one is the original, one is just remastered, and then one is completely reperformed. So it's not just the same songs. It's like actually, okay, taking the same lyrics as the original, but some of them, like they might even change this time signature, or they might like the scale in which they're playing, and so it's really crazy.
That's really interesting. I like that.
I think it's interesting how, and it's full circle to our main topic, of course, and I wish we were getting into that. That would be such a good segue. And Alex says getting a package and having a good look was a huge highlight. And so, yeah, love and appreciation for the chocolate going on, or choco art, as the creator decides that. And so let's move forward to the questionably quick questions. So firstly, what time is it, and where exactly are you?
It is 10:21. And I am in Bristol, England, in my bedroom.
Okay. Have you been... I don't think you went to City of Games. Why didn't you go?
That's a really good question, because my playgroup couldn't get tickets. We left it all up to one specific individual, and we perhaps left things a little bit too late.
What was the last convention you actually went to?
Are you counting online conventions?
I was actually thinking about that, just as I said it. Let's go with, what's the first last digital convention? What's the last physical convention?
Last digital convention, I did Essen this year. I did Digi Essen, or whatever they ended up calling it, which was very, very strange. So did that, was okay. Last physical convention, I think I did an Insomnia gaming, like the LAN festival. I think was the very end of last year, because I think all of the things this year got shifted for us. Yeah, because Expo this year was digital, unfortunately. So yeah, I think it was an Insomnia, which I love, because I love going and playing board games with people who are video gamers. There's something I find very entertaining about that.
Actually, I'm quite curious about that. And everyone in chat, feel free to jump in with your questionably quick questions for the next 5 minutes or so. And so, do you find that, how would you compare something like that to something like UK Games Expo?
I think there's what I really like about them is me specifically as a professional. What I like doing is I like working on games and working with companies that aren't huge conglomerate, massive powerhouses. And what I like is trying to find unique and interesting places to put games in front of people who wouldn't necessarily play them. So I think there's something quite overwhelming about going to Essen or going to Expo and seeing like, how many new games are released? Oh, there's like 1,000 games that are released here. And as a gamer, I love that. But if you're a designer, that's hugely overwhelming, because anybody that you put your game in front of is going to say, this is great, but I've seen 999 more. So I really like these weird crossover things. So yeah, doing Insomnia, where it's a video game festival, you can go and take your board game there to demo it in front of people. And that's going to be one of the only games they've played. And you can have these interesting experiences where you can share a game with somebody who maybe has never had their mind opened up to tabletop role-playing games, or, you know, to dexterity games or something.
Yeah, it's something that I never really explored, and yeah, kind of yeah, we'll see if I get a chance at some point. Have you ever been to something like MCM Comic Con?
Yeah, MCM I think also falls under that. For me, it's about taking something that shouldn't be and putting it in a different place. So MCM is a great example. Like if you're going there and you're an artist, for example, you go to Artist Alley and there's going to be 1 million people. But if you can find a way to take your board game there, there's a lot fewer people doing that. Yeah, I particularly like those places where there's a lot of mashup of different subcultures, and I think MCM is a great one.
I mean, you've got to make sure that the board game that you're taking is of interest to these people somehow.
Of course.
So how do you ensure this? Okay, this is a game that's of interest to anime lovers, or hey, this is a game of interest to comic readers, or this is a game of interest to video game players.
It's very much about doing your research, knowing your demographics. The internet is a hugely powerful thing now, and we can do more research than we've ever done before. And we all have, mailing lists. We have our website. We have data that we can pull from all of our online sources. So that allows us to see demographically the rough age that people would be falling within, what their interests are. And then that data helps us inform and say, oh, actually, your demographic are really into watching not just anime, but perhaps a specific show or something, which then can help say, oh, maybe you should be going to these specific events. Maybe not just a big Comic-Con, but maybe your demographic would be really well suited to something a bit smaller and a bit more local, for example, for like a local anime con or something.
Oh, that's definitely a nice thing. And so it sounds like you feel more gratification from sharing board games with this brand new audience and like getting yourself out there. Do you find that there's also a wee bit more risk involved, or?
Oh, yes and no. I think it's a protective layer, because I think there's more risk, obviously, because you're more likely to have people say, oh, actually, board games in general aren't for us. But as if it's something that's close to your heart, which I only like to work on products that are close to my heart, it gives you a protective layer, because you can say, oh, it's not my product that these people don't like. It's not my game. It's not the thing that I've been spending all my time and passion on. It's that games potentially aren't for them, or maybe they've never seen, a dexterity game before, or a combat game, a PvP combat game or something.
I don't know. Maybe I'm just very, maybe I'm a negative individual, because if people, I'm like always thinking, okay, it's something about my game. And sure, you make a good point. Maybe it is just games in general are not for this person. And we need to remember, maybe some people enjoy watching stuff. Maybe people enjoy reading stuff. Maybe they want a linear experience. And maybe do.
The internet has opened up so many niches and shown us so many subcultures, and has taught us to become so inclusive. What I'm fascinated by are where the little gaps are between genre and between interests, and where those little crossovers are. I did a little bit of work briefly with the London Game Company a few years ago, who had the game called The Football Game. And I remember shooting some video with them over at UK Games Expo. And I was really surprised, because their game didn't sit within the rest of the board gamey demographic. Like, it wasn't a game that was all about fantasy and swords. It wasn't a game about moving spaceships through different planetary systems. It was about football, which ostensibly is not something that many of us, we're generally not sports people. And I love the fact that brought in, hey, this can be inclusive. If you're into sports, if you're into games, like you can have these worlds merge. And I love that. I've got so much time for people trying to make things to expand our minds and open up. I'm not a football person, but I would give that game a go.
I mean, to be fair, they are in England, and so there's a lot of people who are, even if you don't follow football, you know who Manchester United is.
Oh,
you probably know who, that there's some sorts of, okay, Manchester-Liverpool rivalry, that there's some sorts of league thing. And whereas here, certainly, I mean, the UK is its own tiny little bubble where so many people here don't have a clue what American football really even means, or hockey, or any of these sports that are actually quite a bit bigger, potentially. I was going to say globally, although really globally, football, also known as soccer, if you're an American person, is clearly the bigger game. I think. I don't want to...
Yeah, I mean, all I'm thinking of is that all of my knowledge of American football is based on Blood Bowl. That's all I know.
I used to be really into SNES games. I have a big collection of SNES games. One day I am going to just spend, I don't know how many hours it would take, but just like one stream where I just go through all the SNES games and say, oh yeah, this is rubbish because of this reason. Why do I even have it? I'm just keeping this sports game because, you know, I am a completionist.
Yeah.
And yeah.
That would be interesting, though. I would definitely like to watch you fumbling your way through an American football game, like an old, nostalgic American football game with no real knowledge of, like, I don't know how the rules work, like, let alone through an old SNES thing.
I mean, to actually get the SNES on screen, I don't know how I'd even manage that because I played the game. I don't play the games through an emulator. I play it on the proper CRTV. I don't think people would particularly want to have a second camera trained on the TV, so it would be even blurrier than normal.
With flicker as well.
I was just meaning literally just me, not even me playing them, just me talking about why I even have them and what I think of them. Just like literally just showing the boxes and then talking about each one for 5 minutes. So 5 times, let's say 400, what, 2,000? What's, is that correct? Wow, that's a lot of time, isn't it?
You're going to be here a while.
What's 2,000 divided by 60?
I've got a calculator.
Anyway, Xate says, American football's a bigger thing, yes, than baseball, than hockey, than basketball, than your football. Yeah. Apparently. Fantasy football got Alex into football. It's basically a sort of stock market game where you buy and sell stocks and you get points as dividends every week. And Xate played quarterback in the Powder Puff League. Indeed, I don't know anything about that, but it sounds interesting. It sounds like the Powerpuff Girls. I assume it's got nothing to do with that.
I don't know. I think it might do.
So apparently it's 35 hours.
Yeah.
So maybe I should do that.
I think that sounds like a charity stream where you do a marathon. And you do 35 straight hours just talking about SNES games.
Yeah. If anyone's interested in that, let me know. And yeah, do you think that's something that I should look into? I don't feel like I'm big enough to do a charity stream, but why not?
Hey, you've got to aim for it. Aim for the things.
Apparently 33 and a third. So if I did it, maybe if I went through them a wee bit faster, then would I have to do it all in the one go? It's like, anyway, apparently the Powder Puff Girls, or Powder Puff League, it's not a real long season. The proceeds raise money for charity. There we go. And there were a couple of questions. So Xate previously asked, if you could spend time living in a board game world, which world would you choose?
Am I allowed to take role play game worlds? That's quite an important question.
I'm going to say do one including RPG worlds and do one that's including more what Richard Garfield would call awful games.
So if I were to take role play game worlds as well, I'm a huge fan of Tales from the Loop, game that Free League put out with the Simon Stollenhag artwork. Seeing this like the 1980s future that never was of Eastern Europe, like oh, that's exciting. These like beautiful snowy countrysides of the 80s with like robots and dinosaurs. That would be great. Definitely that. That seems like it'd be a fun, reasonably safe, but adventurous place to live. I think that's where you want to be, somewhere there. And if I were to take board games, the thing is, most of the board games I like would have really horrible, really bleak worlds, which you wouldn't want to live in. So I think actually the answer is probably something really bland. Like you'd be like, well, much as I don't wish to play Candyland endlessly, I probably would want to live in Candyland because it's going to be quite safe and it's going to be pleasant to live in. I'll lose my teeth very quickly, but I'll probably choose somewhere like Candyland.
Yeah, they kind of what you
classic
don't know
game.
behind the scenes is they recycle for those kids very quickly. The kids just get minced up, and then like they just keep bringing in new kids. It's like actually a torture device.
Oh yeah, I mean,
Sorry,
now
this
you've
does
sold me.
not
That
touch
is where I want to live.
any of my views about Candyland, just for legal reasons. This is not the real thing. I am just talking entirely in jest.
Wait, I know exactly where I'd want to live. Cat Lady. I'd want to live in the world of Cat Lady, where all cats have little costumes and all cats get to have huge, endless supplies of toys and mountains. That's where I would live. Instant diabetes.
And we've got another shout out. Hello, Bones and Banners. It's lovely to have you join us from YouTube. And yep, Tales from the Loop. I think that's Simon Caruso, who I had on, did a bit of art for one of the versions of that. The other question that was asked was, what is the best comfort food? And I'm going to change it. Answer this if you can, but also answer what is the most recent comfort food that you've had?
So I am a big fan of a big, gross risotto, like a really heavy, very dense with cheese risotto that you leave on the side, and I can just go bowl after bowl after bowl of that. That's the best. That's my thing. Risotto with fish, just parmesan for days, like multiple layers of parmesan through. I've made bowls about so big that I've kept them aside and done that for breakfast and then the following lunch, just because you're feeling sad and you need to plow your way through something really thick, cheesy and stodgy. And that can just be sort of 24 hours worth of food in one big wok.
I like it. And is that the most recent comfort food that you had? When did you last have it?
Yeah, that is over my my winter period. That's been very, very sad. Winter is very difficult for a lot of people, myself included. Yeah, that's my warm up food. Also, it's great because you can cook for multiple people with it very easily. You can just increase the amount of ingredients in a big wok.
Love those answers. And so Xates apparently needs to make hamburgers. All the best with that. So I guess Alex, please mind the chat, and also let Rob kill one of the robots. If you get any robots in the chat, robots get first dibs on killing the robots. Because sometimes we get these robots who just come in and spam, and it's just who will get it first. So we've decided that's the initiation. So let's move on to the main topic, which is, of course, remaking a game with Benji Corless, who I have right here. Now, you talked a wee bit about this game. We will talk a wee bit more about it. I understand. And look, I just want to get this out of the way. Let's have a side tangent, if we can. Someone was asking on Board Game Media and reviewers, hey, is it okay to approach people to say, can I come onto your show? Because I want to talk about my game. I've got this Kickstarter coming. And it's like, yeah, you can absolutely, but you can't just come on and be talking about just that on its own. Now, there is always this, look, if I am going on a show as a publisher, as a designer, as a person who's fascinated with games, why am I going there? I might be going there just because right now I'm feeling incredibly low and I just want to be chatting to people. That's honestly the reason why I stream as much as I do. I might be doing it because I want to promote my stuff. That's the reason that I've done a lot of it, especially in the past, to kind of say, hey, I do have some awareness, and sometimes it's to raise awareness, and sometimes it is to position yourself as an expert. Now, when you're trying to position yourself as an expert, I would say that if you actually do your research and come in with proper knowledge, then you're doing great value for the people who are watching. Then they get to hear interesting stuff. And for yourself, it's like, okay, Benji actually knows partially what they're talking about. And by association, this company isn't going to be a fly-by-night, we don't care about what we're making company. Now, I don't mean to cast aspirations upon you, like that was never in question. That's not my immediate thoughts, but I'm being slightly facetious, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so, like, if someone comes on and then it's like, well, with Martin Wallace, okay, people kind of already accept that Martin Wallace has made some good games at least. Whereas if it's like, who's Bez? And like, if I'm on a show talking about word games, and if I were to go on Ludology, which I've checked, and I'm going to hopefully do a wee bit more research and go on in the next year or so, and then it will be like, okay, now Bez actually knows their stuff, and that's a lot of the reason why, yeah, I do seminars at UK Games Expo, and so it's kind of like there's this weird balance between self-promotion and talking about what you came to talk about. Do you know what I mean?
I think for me, one of the important things is that as creatives, what we do has to be underpinned by research, whether it's conscious or not. It's something that we're constantly doing to inform our practice. And it's important to bring that and be able to show that to other people, not so that you can self-promote, but so that you can give them a little bit of insight and a bit of interest. Because I'm a huge proponent for podcasts. I listen to hours and hours of podcasts every day, and I do that because I feel like it adds something to my life. I feel the same thing applies to stuff like this, right? Like it's all well and good if you want to talk about your game, but what are you bringing for people? Like nobody cares about your game. What they care about is what it brings, what the game brings to their life, whether it brings enjoyment to the table. And if you're in this sort of forum, then what does that information bring to them? It's important for me that you can gift audiences with things of interest, because that's why we're here as human beings walking around the earth, right? Is just to find things that interest us, so that we can keep moving and we can keep developing as people.
Yeah, like I do have a knack for understatement sometimes. Like at least partially.
No, I'll take that.
But the thing is, you know what? You never know entirely what you're talking about, do you? It's always a yeah, and have that for your ringtone so you can be reminded, so you can be constantly humbled.
Yeah,
and
I like that.
Yeah, and we did have a bot. Rob is just too slow. But anyway, with that tangent's gone. Yeah, we will. I just want to kind of, yeah, actually, it's just like, it's one of these things that it's kind of like the elephant in the room, like, except, yeah, that's why you are here. And it's like, yeah, you are here to tell people, hey, there's this game and you've got a new version of a game and it's coming out in 2021, and here, because you are here, like, I'm doing your work for you partially because, hey, look at the words that just came out of mouth. Not that I mean, said anything about what game it is, but it's like, yeah, for sure it's raising awareness, but also I think number one has to be trying to talk about the thing here. And I think that, I guess, at the end of this wee tangent, it's like, yeah, for anyone, if you want to come on to the show, that's completely fine, as long as the number one priority is kind of, let's talk about things in a meaningful way, let's say. Let's be genuine. Let's not just
make
be like,
content.
This is the best thing ever. Because, let's be honest, your game, any given game, it's likely to, it might be good. I hope that it's great, but it's unlikely to, like, revolutionize the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've been having that exact conversation. Like, in terms of our social platforms, I really hate it when you go onto a company's Twitter and all you see is just like a feed of, hey, got this game, it's amazing. Like, I'm there, but I'm not really getting anything out of that. It's not enjoyable. And actually, if you look at people's Twitter feeds that are particularly engaging, it's the ones that are creating content that feels like it's of worth. Things where there's interesting opinion, interesting discussion pieces, interesting conversation. Because it's not just people who are self-promoting, they're actually creating interesting content. Because, like you say, it's what's going to change the world is content and new ideas. What's not going to change the world is just a glaring advert that's just being held up in front of people saying, please buy my thing. Like, I've been working on our Instagram feed, And we've specifically been putting up all of our art has like sketches going all the way through to like sketches to inks to final versions. And my goal with it was to specifically try and make something that was of interest to people. Like if you're part of that art community and you're looking at getting into the illustration, it helps show you like these are the steps that people take. It's something that's much more interesting and thought-provoking rather than just saying, here's a great piece of art. Like I want to show what the journey is through that. And I feel like that adds something to people rather than just having endless pictures that say, please buy this, it is $10.99. It's not worth anything to anybody, is it?
I mean, I almost feel like we should have you on at some point to talk about marketing and stuff, because it's really interesting the way that marketing can be done. And I've done a lot of stuff with the LDEC, with Chris, and the LDEC Twitter account is 90% just Chris doing photos of cards and saying, hey, what words can you make that uses at least one letter from all these cards? Or, hey, categorical time, what's a card that you can think of that starts with one of these letters? Or what's a animal that you can think of? Or, hey, Fable time, the first card is a sad dummy. The second card, we used I was about to say AC, although that's not even a real card. I'm just thinking of Alex now and says the second card was a nice zombie. What would be a good third story element that starts with OU, for example? And then getting people involved. And clearly that is very much self-promoting, and it's a hard line to draw, although once you start bringing in other people's reviews and but there are going to be at least some just random questions of, hey, what's your favorite food? And it's, I don't know, it's a really weird line to draw, because I see, like, for example, with Asmodee, okay, like you look at one of their things and it's just, okay, we're retweeting reviews, sharing our achievements that we've got. And because there are so many reviews for one of those games, that means that they're actually sharing a lot of content. So, and because Asmodee is such a big thing, you might really get into it. And so I think there is a time and a space for that, having a Twitter feed that is just, hey, this is 100% our stuff and about our game. And if you really want to get into it a wee bit more, then here, follow our Twitter feed. But at the same time, when it comes to an interview like this, I think it's got to be the humanity and let's get into something in depth. And I think that's why I've enjoyed having that moment to have a wee bit more of a blether. Do you have anything more to say? Sorry.
Yeah, self-reflection. It was what it's about, like humanizing one another and saying that, you know, we're human beings. We aren't just horrible machines. I think the Asmodee one is a really good example, because if you were to have somebody from like the head of Asmodee, if you were to get like John or somebody on, then that conversation would be so different to what their Twitter feed would look like, because it wouldn't just be accolades. You'd be having them as a human being, and you'd be able to break through that a little bit because the format is so different. I think, it's fascinating. I think what you're saying is fascinating.
I think that's a really good point that you're making. It's that the message has to fit the format, and you have to be upfront. And you need to be aware of the show that you're going on to. I used to be feeling like, oh my God, I need to be watching 100% of the videos of this person before I go onto their show. I need to be listening to like all of someone's podcast. Like, okay, if it's like 300 episodes, maybe I'd only listen to 100 of them. But I would still do a hell of a lot of research before I even approach someone. In some ways, maybe a bit too much, because frankly, you don't need to go further back than 6 months, and someone might even change. So look, like, skim what the titles, listen to a couple of shows, and now I'm kind of feeling like that's probably enough to get an idea of what someone's about. And listen to a few of their shows. You don't need to like listen to 100% of their content. I really would not, certainly at this point where I've produced 258 episodes times about 2 on average, maybe that's 516 hours. Even if you put that on double speed on YouTube, 258 hours. I would not expect anyone to spend more than 10 solid days watching it just to ask, can I come on? I would, however, expect someone to watch one episode just to kind of get a sense of what goes on. Maybe skim through a few and to be like, okay, so that's what this person talks about. So look through the YouTube to kind of be like, okay, what kind of length are they? What gets discussed? Okay, let me just skim through and get an idea. And okay, so yeah, probably gone on a bit too much. And I know that our main topic is going to need a lot of time on its own. So let's get back into it and let's get away from this tangent. So, remaking a game. Can we discuss what that even means?
Yeah, I definitely think we should define that because there's a grey area, right? Because there's a grey area of reprinting versus remaking. So I suppose when I'm talking about remaking, I'm talking about taking the original product and changing it for the better, changing it in some way, making some additions to it before it gets put back out. So not just reprinting it like for like, not just taking Twister and being like, we're just printing the same mat again. I'm talking about taking Twister and changing the colors around, moving where all the spots are. You've still got the same core, but you've kept to the essence of what the thing is. So in my mind, what I think about quite like classic remakes of things, we spoke about Fireball Island. I think that's a great example, a recent example of that. Catacombs is one of the things for me that was a real game changer that opened my eyes up. I was really into Catacombs, and Elsra, who put out a new version. The game is the same. The core game is the same with this dexterity dungeon crawling thing. But the art style is radically different. Some little tweaks to the mechanics here and there, and the components are different. But it keeps to the same essence. It's like they've poured all the love into a game that potentially didn't have as much resource to have in it in the first place. So that's kind of what I think about as a remake, taking something and lovingly crafting something new out of it, but keeping to that core of what the game was about.
I mean, there's a couple of really subjective words there. Like, firstly, lovingly. I mean, is that to suggest that if it's not done with love, if it's done by people who are begrudgingly doing it as part of their job because they are staff designers, that it's no longer a remake? I'm being slightly flippant, of course.
No, it's a good point though. Have you seen the new Hero Quest?
Yes, I have. I've not seen it in person. I've seen the kicks. Sorry, what's it actually called? The Hasbro thing that's pretty much like Kickstarter.
Yeah, the not Kickstarter. What do you think that looks like it's been lovingly remade, or do you think it's been remade?
But it is a remake.
It is definitely a remake for sure.
That's all I'm saying.
For sure.
And I don't want to. I don't even want to hypothesize, frankly, on how much love people have for the craft, because you know what? If I were hired to make Football Quiz Game 2021, I would not be a good person. Why are you even hiring me for this? But frankly, okay, if you're paying me a decent hourly wage, sure, I'll do it. And I'll do some research into football, even though I don't know anything about it. And
I think this year's a good year to do it because there's going to be very little football to be covering.
Oh my gosh, there might be some really interesting facts there.
Yeah, there's a gap in the market for us. We could do it.
Sorry, I'm also, oh my gosh, cynically remade. Yeah. I love that. But yeah, sure, I would happily, I don't know if there's, I'm sure there's some sorts of, my point is I can think of many games that I would work on for the money, and I'd be like, yeah, I'll do it with the love that I can muster. And yeah, I would suggest a definition of it's when there's been meaningful changes or changes of some substance. So like if you've got Twister and you change the blues to a slightly different shade of blue, or you change a typo, or you even change the box. At the point where you're changing the box cover, I could see some people saying, well, this is a substantial change. But I would say, oh, that's. But then once you get to Jungle Book Twister, you know, well, that's got slightly different colors. It's got new artwork on it, and also the dots. I know this doesn't sound like much, but the dots are in a completely different arrangement. I mean, that completely changes the game. Also, and like the game is actually totally different. If you play the rules as written, Jungle Book Twister, it's literally you go around the board. You're actually having to sort of go around the board on all fours rather than just stay in one position and survive. So you are needing to go around the board and keep going around the boards.
What we're talking about here, I guess, is that grey area between like Twister is a great example because it's simple and elegant, right? We're not talking about something with too many quote unquote moving pieces. So much as it's silly to use Twister because it's not a thing that I'm hugely invested in, I think actually the elegance of it is a good discussion point. What we're talking about is the grey area, right? Between where do you draw a line between what is remaking something and what is making just a new version of, like how much of a difference does there need to be? There's the classic idiom of having a car, and in 50 years time, is that car the same car if you've changed the engine and you've changed the exhaust and you've changed all the parts of it? What retains it being the same car if you've changed over 50 years all the parts within it? And I think that's why I go back to talking about the spirit of what the game is, what the original intent, and that I guess that's where I use that word love to be like the idea of the essence of what that core was, and whether you're trying to just improve on what that core is, or whether you're trying to change it in too many directions to make something entirely fresh, because it's an interesting gray area.
Have you are you familiar with this example that Bones and Banners mentions?
No, I'm going to load up and just see if it rings any more bells. Let me have a quick look.
I am unfamiliar with it myself, but I've made a note for me to check it out. And Rob Harper suggests there should be as many Twister editions as there are Monopoly editions. Downton Abbey Twister, Star Wars Twister, Birmingham Twister. Oh, that would be fun.
So it's like smokestacks that you're trying to avoid the smokestacks.
No, just like, you know, instead of different coloured dots, you've got different landmarks, and you're putting you are giants exploring. I would let's look at Yogi, okay, because that's a game slightly closer to my heart because I made it, and and like genuinely, if in the original, between In a Bind and Yogi, there was 1.5 cards change. So right hand right of right elbow, which, you know, my right hand's right of my right elbow, but then also whether something to the right or left of, okay, if I'm doing this, is it still to the right? Because it, and also people took a few seconds to understand that, which is not great for the kind of game it is. You want it to be immediate understandability. Had that out, replace it with right hand above left hand. There was also one typo that got changed. All the artwork was changed. Now it seems like, and also components wise, like the cards were now plastic. There's these card holders. People would, I think, agree that Yogi is a remake of In a Bind. And in my opinion, now that I've played it enough, I think it's a better version. Now, Yogi, it's been 3.5 years since it came out at Essen 2017. There's one card that I'm not entirely happy with anymore, and I think it would be slightly better for the game if that card were to be put into Yogi Guru, because it's hand on a knee, and it's like, well, that kind of uses the lower body, and maybe put something like card touching forehead from Yogi Guru into that original game, like bring it back so that is literally all above the waist. And even the change as minor as that, like at what point is there a difference between a second edition, a slight update, and a remake? I mean, where is the line? And I guess this is the I suppose really blurry point.
Yeah, it's down to the creator to define what their lines are, I think, and where you want to draw that. because yeah, it is very, very grey as whether, like you say, is it a remake, is it another edition, is it an entirely new expansion? That's another thing that we could go off onto.
Standalone expansion, like what was that Dead of Winter one? Long Night.
Yeah, and it's something that doesn't have a hard and fast meaning, which is why it's something that's really fascinating to me in terms of what that means, not just for us as creatives, but also what it means for the audiences who are playing these games. Because how you define that as an individual also relates to how you take the game on board and how you experience the game. Because if I'm playing something and I'm deeming it to be it's a remake, is it a reprint? Like that has a feeling that's very different to something that might be like a second edition or something. Like if I'm playing Descent second edition, then I have an expectation that this is going to be like the first one, that you should have improved everything and it should be much better. If something is just a remake, I expect there to be maybe more differences with it. Not necessarily everything corrected, just differences. If something is a reprint, I expect it to be exactly the same. If Fireball Island was a reprint rather than a remake, I would expect it to be 100% the same. And if it wasn't, I would get very angry.
Okay, I've got a second aspect to this definition, to this working definition, okay? So firstly, there's got to be some meaningful changes, and I understand what's meaningful is different. Secondly, actually, I'm going to add a third thing. Secondly, it has to be the main version. So Birmingham Monopoly is not a remake of Monopoly, it's just a new version. And by the same token, Jungle Book thing or The Long Night, it's not really remaking Dead of Winter. So that brings me this 2.5 point, is that it has to be branded as that main version and as a remake. Because in a sense, I know this is a really circular argument, arguably, but it feels like if the intention is for it to be a remake, it has to be branded as a remake and explains that, hey, this isn't just a retelling or a remanaged. I mean, Yogi Guru is not a remake of Yogi. The point is for people to play that original version. Yogi Guru is like the more advanced, more difficult. Hey, that wasn't physical enough, that wasn't silly enough for you? Well, this is literally the most ridiculous that I felt like I could get away with getting published. And there are a couple of cards in there that I wasn't even sure if they would publish, frankly. And there are a couple of cards that I had in there that were, yeah, this is definitely over the line, and then we took them out. So there's nothing over there that it's like this is over the line, but there's like cards that you've got to constantly move for the entire thing. Cards that it's just like this card touching white, this card touching black. What does that even mean? I mean, that's the kind of thing that's going to get you into arguments with your group. But oh my god! And I want to give the chat is making me chuckle with
Milk. Oh, that's.
All the spots on one half are red, and there is a wall between them and the colourful ones.
Oh my god, political twister. I'd never even considered that one could make political twister. I was too busy looking at Milton Keynes twister. I love Milton Keynes twister, that's great.
Oh, yeah. Wow, you people are brilliant. This is way too much. Twister is an aerial control game, 100% with big body dexterity. But I think we've established that it is also how it is, if you are agreed with what I just said.
Yeah, for sure.
Then we've got, okay, so, yeah, let's actually, rather than going into why it's good, it's like, why do people want to do a remake? Let's be honest. I mean, so often it is about the bottom line. And with a board game company, it might be like, well, you know what, that game, you know, there was a game about, let's imagine that there was some sort of game about going off on another planet and then adding, you know, somehow shaping the land on this other planet. And then maybe there's a lots of people, this is completely hypothetical, that felt like, you know, there were some problems with that game, like, but then maybe later on they come up with, okay, you know what, that game that we've got, it was selling well, but now the year is 2030, sales have gone down a wee bit, but you know what we could do? We could make that better and make it good for today's environment. You're not starting from zero. You know that this is a proven thing. You know that it was already a good game, that there was a lot of people who already bought into it, who already loved it. You've got that ready-made audience. It's likely to sell more than if you just make a hypothetical game in the year 2030 called Manscaping Venus. That sounds terrible. But I was trying to... or you know what I mean, like if you or given generic pitch that you get from someone, even no matter how good that pitch is, no matter how good that pitched game is, it doesn't have the built-in audience, and you do have to do all this work to get to the points that you might have had to do to get to a game that was already released. But if you're going to make it, then you're going to be able to make it even better, and you're likely to sell more. I mean,
well, we spoke earlier about providing things for audiences when we were talking about marketing and like social platforms, and I kind of see it as the same thing, because what you're doing is you're saying, here is this game that people know and love, but it might not be perfect. And what you're doing is you're trying to be additive and create something that can improve that for people. And in some cases, and I think a lot more recently, some of that is about bringing it to audiences who couldn't have access to it. Hero Quest being reprinted on Kickstarter, like that's a game that people have been fighting over on various Facebook groups to try and buy old battered copies that have been rescued out of bins for decades. So the idea that suddenly people can get their hands on it again is enough, let alone that there's going to be better component quality and so on. So I think there is something about bringing that to an audience and feeling like you're able to give them something and say, hey, we can bring this thing out of obscurity. We can get it into your hands, or in some cases we can improve it, or in some case, you know, like with our game, a lot of that is about trying to just up the art quality, up the story quality, and turn up all the dials that would have been up in the first place. It's just that there weren't the resources for the original game.
Yeah, and you're kind of getting at the heart of why do that rather than a straight up reprint, which I appreciate, because that gets into the heart of why bother remaking it. And because for sure, let's say it's gone to the at this point, Fireball Island could have been reprinted, and I'm sure that some rights could have been worked out where it would have been, you know, economically viable to reprint it. But at that point, why remake it? Well, I guess it gets into why make a game, kind of, because you might be doing it for your own personal, hey, I want to bring something great into the world. You might be doing it for, well, people are going to pay more and appreciate something that is actually better. And also here you do have, again, that I'm not going to shy away from mentioning it, that whole financial aspects of, well,
yeah,
if we've got a straight up reprint, then the people who already have Fireball Islands are not going to be buying this. Whereas if we have a remake, well, then those people who already love Fireball Islands, they might buy this as well.
Yeah, I think from a cynical point of view, I'm a big Magic player. I'm a huge Magic fan. That's my jam. And they will forever, as a company, they will print, if they need reprints of old cards because there's not enough in the system, they'll reprint them, but with new artwork, because that means that the people who have the originals, they still have their originals. They're not changed. They still hold their nostalgia and their value. But you're able to make it so that the new ones are accessible for people who want to play with them. And it means that you then have these two sort of concurrent things. Because I think if you were to take Monopoly, we mentioned the different various versions of Monopoly. Classic Monopoly that has that retro look to it is still a product that is sold side by side with current Monopoly. It then becomes this additional money stream for Hasbro to put out, doesn't it? So yeah, I mean, for a lot of companies, it is very much just about trying to maximize output, because they know that People who own the old one don't want an exact reprint of it. They want a new skin for it, and then they might buy it. But also the new one being popular, with new artwork that might appeal to a modern sensibility and a sensible audience, that they might get into that game and then say, oh, actually, I bought New Talisman, but now I've played 300 hours of New Talisman. Do you know what would be really fun? We should get the old one from the 80s. That would look great. And then, you become more invested, and then you want to have those retro ones. And I say that because as a Magic player, that's exactly what I've done. I've got huge collections of cards where I've built decks, and then I've gone, now I'm much more invested in this. I do want the old cards. I do want the white bordered, or I want the black bordered, because I'm a nerd.
Yeah, and it kind of allows you a way to express yourself. I know there's people
Definitely.
who, for example, collect every lightning bolt, and it's not like
I've seen that guy.
And so, yeah, having here's this English alpha version. Here's this. I think alpha only came out in English. Same with the first couple of sets. But then, okay, here's the first Italian. Here's the Italian version in this from this printing. Here's the Italian version from this other printing. And just with Lightning Bolt, there might be like 50 versions of this card if you count each printing and each different look. And some of them are substantially different. Some of them have different artwork that you could see straight away. Some of them, when it came back, it had this long flavor text that was about having the crack and bringing to mind the age-old days. It was almost like a meta reference to, hey, we've brought Lightning Bolt back after like 5-10 years or however long it had been. We've brought this back, and isn't it triumphant that finally, for 1 mana, you can hit your people for free damage?
Free!
Free! For the price of what? 2? Because normally it's 2. And so it is a slightly overpowered card by today's standards, but it depends on the environment, and that kind of changing environment. Anyway, let's not get into there. Let me just quickly say that according to chat, Berlin 1989 Twister would end when David Hasselhoff arrives, but apparently David prefers to be known as the Hoff because it's less hassle. And true story, there is somewhere on the internet where you can read about my interactions with David Hasselhoff if you look hard enough, because I have had real life interactions with Plot Twister, where you don't know how the rules will change. Twister, where each spot has different tornado rating. And yep, hello Elaine, it is lovely to see you. So we've decided that people might want to do this for selfish reasons. Making money, getting more versions of the product out there. And so why is it a good thing? Not from the point of view of the person making it, but from the point of view of the game-playing public, and from the point of view of people who would like games to evolve.
Yeah, I think bringing something up to date, bringing something into our new community hobby, I think is always something that's interesting, and it was something that's important. It keeps those ideas fresh and keeps them involved. I think there's also something quite nice about sort of keeping a torch for something and holding the flame alight and trying to preserve something. I know for our game, our key designer Chris, he grew up playing the Gothic game, and it was something that he fell in love with because he loved the weird, witty humor of how people would die in the cards. And that was something that he noticed that suddenly we weren't really talking about anymore. And as the years went by, that sort of disappeared. So it was something that he wanted to hold a torch for and be like, oh, this is something that is amazing, and I want to bring that back to the world and bring that back into the community so that we can revisit it and relook at it under a microscope, as it were. And I think there's something to be said about preserving ideas. Like, we live in a world online, particularly, of people being curators of content. Content creation is often secondary now to people who are curating and finding interesting things. And I think the same thing goes for board games. Board Game Geek is so prevalent because it's so good at allowing people to get together and curate content and say, hey, if you've played this game, you would really like this game. Oh, I found these these cool little niche things that you wouldn't have found before. And we can bring together all these little niches. And I think remaking allows us to keep those flames alight so that we can bring them back into curation and we can keep things together. It's like a shared history, right? Board games are a shared social history for us.
Yeah, and that's kind of another reason why, from the developers or designers' point of view, why you might want to do it. Like, if there's, let's say I was given permission to work on something that I've loved from my childhood, and then to update it for today's standards, and to make it a bit more representative of the world that we live in. Because for sure, when there's a game and it's been going, if it's like 30, 40 years old, it's like, okay, this isn't quite gender neutral, you sort of forgive that. It's like, oh, this bit where, okay, you go out the thing and all the women are crying. Well, that's not a great stereotype to have all the crying women just because you leave the village. But, okay, you sort of forgive that and then you laugh at it. But and for sure, you have to love and accept what the current thing is. Like, you know, I've been going through the Warlock of Firetop Mountain where we're kind of joking about how, yeah, you are bloodthirsty tyrants, actually. You're just killing everyone you come across and you're ruthlessly going in there to steal this treasure. You have to be on board with what the original is. Sometimes it's, you know, if you don't like that, then you've got to say, well, don't be remaking it. Because if you're against what the original spirit is, then don't do it. But if it's like, you know what, there is some beautiful spirit here, but there's just a few bits around it that are problematic, then maybe it is still worth kind of just getting into, and then being able to put your stamp on it, being able to feel like, yes, I made this already brilliant thing even better. And from the consumer's perspective as well, I think that that sort of love is going to shine through, that sort of attention to detail. And frankly, the amount of time that's been spent on it. Frankly, I know that all the commercial aspects that we talked about can be seen as, hey, that doesn't matter to me as a consumer. But it kind of does. Because, let's be honest here, Magic the Gathering is actually a good game. Now, Magic the Gathering is actually developed in a really accomplished way because they've got a lot of resources at their disposal. They can do so much work, spend so many hours on every card, pondering it, playtesting it over and over, and investigating such a massive possibility space before they come back in and look at every single detail. And that's not something that most games have access to. I've seen a game where after the Kickstarter, it's been like, hey, this could be better and could spend another week on this. And then the publishers be like, yeah, the Kickstarter didn't do as well as I'd hoped. I'm just going to not bother with it. And that's incredibly sad for everyone involved. Whereas if you're going to go back, well, you know it's going to be, at least in the perspective of the person making it, it's going to be better than the original. You've already got all the hours sunk into that original thing, plus all the additional hours that are going to go into this new version. Do you know what I mean?
I think so. You were saying about trying to change things and sort of and bend them and sort of tidy up. I think was the phrase that you were skirting around, the idea of like tidying up where maybe we have no female characters, for example. A really good example of that is the Conan the Barbarian game, the miniatures combat game that came out. And that game, when that game came out, there was a huge discussion of, there is one female miniature and she's topless. Like, is that appropriate? But like you say, this is a property that is steeped in that. It is steeped in this sense of machismo, and it's steeped in this sense of sort of sexism and this sort of slightly uncomfortable sense of how we want to live as people, frankly. But I think what's interesting is that by creating that game and revisiting that world, it's allowed us to have that conversation. And I think that's what's really important about reprints of things, is that it allows us as gamers to be able to have that conversation and bring that back into the light, as it were, and rediscuss what that once was. Like, so for example, Damnation, the game that we're making, Damnation specifically has retained the player combat with player death. So we have player elimination in our game, which very few games do. And we specifically wanted to keep that because it felt like a core part of the original game. And that has created so much discussion for people about how they feel about player elimination, like what happens in that. And we've worked on mechanics to make it so that there are things for players to do once they're eliminated. But it's an interesting thing to bring that back into the light, as it were, and say, hey, can we reassess? Can we re-talk about this for a second, rather than just curbing it and sweeping it away under the rug?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. How I think what you're getting at is that a game isn't just the game itself as a physical entity. The game is also the conversations and experiences, not just when you're playing it, but what Richard Garfield originally called the metagame. Yes. Although the term metagame has now evolved to mean something quite different to what it was originally intended. But anytime you discuss the game, anytime that this brings up emotions, and something like Holding On, The Troubled Life of Billy Kerr is all around that. And Bones and Banners, bringing back to Drac Borgen, which Ian mentioned earlier, apparently it created 4 new female characters to match I am going to assume there were 4 male characters from 1985. And that's a really interesting situation, where to contrast that with Conan, it's like, okay, I'm not familiar with Drac Borgen at all. I will have to investigate this. But what was the central, spirit? Because you're right, Benji, that in so many ways, the central spirit of Conan is quite problematic. And the amount of, I'm going to say, unhealthy, it's like, almost like, I don't know if I'm misusing this term, but I'm thinking of toxic masculinity. Like, if you get into, the whole notion that Conan, all the men, like, have to be this perfect person, like, they're not allowed to display any emotion, any weakness, anything like that. But then at the same time, all the women are these fragile, emotional creatures, and that's, really problematic in so many ways.
Sure.
And by bringing it into the limelight, sure, it's facilitated that conversation, but to the same extent, if it really is a problematic universe, if it is actually reinforcing problematic stereotypes, then should that even have been brought back?
Yeah, let alone should somebody be monetizing that problem.
And
I think that takes you to, if you look at the Games Workshop products, I think they've been doing some really interesting stuff with their Warhammer universe over the last sort of 10 years or so, where their whole institution of Warhammer 40k was based on this huge stereotypes of these masculine, huge figures, and almost a world that had no female presence whatsoever. And actually, over the years, not only have they started to bring that in, not perfectly by all means, but they've also started to bring in younger characters. They've started to diversify and sort of not necessarily soften, but change with how our times are changing, which I've got a lot of time for. I really commend that. They've got a series of choose your own adventure books that they've got out for young adults now that I think are really interesting, rather than just feeding this constant flow of like, here's a huge muscly guy who's got like 3 hearts and he's going to destroy all worlds. They have characters who are much more interested in each other's emotional lives. I think that I've got a lot of time for that.
Yeah, I mean, if you bring in some nuance, it's just, look, there's a time for one-dimensional characters, and I was talking about Usagi Yojimbo back then. And Usagi Yojimbo, there's a character called Jay, whose name is a pun, because if you add the suffix san, so if someone were to say, that's what Jay-san des, it kind of sounds a bit like Jason from Friday the 13th. And so Jay-san, or Jay as they're always called, because Stan Sakai is never that gosh to actually use but it's not as overt as when you've got Dragon Ball Z characters who are all named after vegetables, for example. But for sure, there's this weird character who's this haunted spirit, but within that, there's a story about Jen and the stray dog and Usagi and all these bounty hunters and people who aren't 100% good and aren't 100% selfish, do have some compassion and some, and it's this interesting mixture. And I think that is when we are updating something, maybe we can bring little bits of depth into it. A quick hello to So Crafty So. Sorry, I didn't see it at the time, but when we're talking about pitfalls, I don't want to say Conan, that's a bad example, but do you think it was a bad example? Because I'm just raising the concept that it is is there like a moral responsibility? Do you think that it is harmful to society to bring back something like that?
That's a really interesting question. It's a really interesting question. I think your responsibility is not just to the players, but I think your responsibility is also to the property. So for us, we've been working quite closely with Robert Wayne Simmons, who has the original rights to the Gothic game. We've been working with him so that we are taking the actual spirit of his game and putting it into ours. But with that comes a sense that we can understand what his intent was, and we can understand what our responsibilities are to look after that product and help foster that. So I think that's really important. I think, you know, that can go wrong. And we spoke earlier about how important research is. I think that's a really important thing, is not just researching and understanding what the product is that you're remaking. So in our case, looking back at all the components of the original game, but also it means understanding what that community used to be and where they are now. So part of what I've done when I came on board was to research who the original fans of the Gothic game from the 90s, who those people were, and where they would be now. And that means that you can understand not just what the game was trying to do, but also how it was perceived by its audience at the time. So for us, in the case of the Gothic game, that was a game that it was a horror combat game. And originally, that game was taken and it was LARPed around castles around the UK. And there are all these pictures of people in suits of armor and various costume playing the game like giant-sized versions of the game in castles around the country, which is a very different world than we're in now for any board game release. But that's really interesting because it's really telling as to what the interest was in that game and where that was at the time. And then you have to project where those people can be now. So I think the other thing in terms of pitfalls that I really focus on, in terms of really putting some meat on the bones and taking the original skeleton of the game and trying to flesh out and renew, I think you have to remember that fans will always love the original, and any changes you make, they will see as changes, and they'll say, why isn't this the original game? Why have you changed the thing that I love? Because it's subjective, isn't it? One thing that you hold dearly is not necessarily what somebody else might hold dear to them. So you want to make changes because you want to improve. So in our case, we really wanted to inject a lot more love and care into the artwork. We wanted to bring that right up to date. And we wanted to take a lot of the mechanics and clean them up. But there were also some core tenets that we knew that people would get frustrated at the change. So I guess importantly, one of those pitfalls is that you can never please everybody. Somebody will always be upset. But it's about justifying why you're doing it, and importantly, showing people how much you love and understand what that property is. And hopefully, I believe if you do that correctly, then there aren't going to be big, major ethical problems or moral problems, because you've done your research and you understand the implications of where they will go.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. A quick hello to Carter Lee, who was just asking a wee bit more about this game. And if I can, and I have copy pasted a wee bits of information into the chat, which should be helpful. And Carter Lee's asking about the video game, because apparently there's a PC game series Gothic which is it unrelated to that?
Yeah, so it's unrelated. They'll come up in searches, but it's unrelated to the old PC game. It's based on the old. If you look on BGG, we're based on the old board game, the Gothic Game. It's got this jet black cover with white text on it. It's got a very, very early 90s look to it. So we're based on the Gothic Game, which is why the title of our remake is Damnation, the Gothic Game. So we reference the old title because we're working with the original creator of the Gothic Game. But yeah, we aren't related to the video game. We have got a tabletop simulator version of our game, but that's the closest we're probably going to get in terms of moving into that space, because obviously we want to keep ourselves separate.
And you did talk earlier that you had gone to Insomnia, and you do play video games. I know you do enjoy video games, but you haven't worked professionally in video games, I believe.
No, I have not. It's definitely a space that I could see myself doing. I think I would need to work on something interesting and innovative. I'd want to work with some interesting, unique indie things, I think. But I would definitely be open to the idea. I think there's an interesting crossover space between tabletop and like indie games now more than there ever has been.
But yeah, just for anyone who's been joining us, because I noticed we had another like 5-10 people join in the past 10 minutes. So we are talking about remaking games and updating them, where it's basically, we've decided it's when meaningful changes are made. So it's not so much just a reprint, it's not so much a second edition, but something that's substantially different. And I guess, I say it's not just a second edition, but Twilight Imperium, let's say you got Twilight Imperium 5th edition, which I have no knowledge of Twilight Imperium coming out with a 5th edition anytime soon, although I know someone who might have some inside knowledge, but they would probably not tell me. And if anything, I would guess that given the amount of work that Fantasy Flights are doing with 4th editions, are probably going to continue that for a while. But
I can imagine.
When a new edition of a game like that comes out with so many substantive changes, does that go through... would you say that you've got to kind of put that into its own category compared to a remake where something has been out of print for a while? I mean, do you think that something having been completely out of print for a while changes the dynamic, because then suddenly you come to it and you're almost free to make more substantial changes? Because, hey, look at the Gothic Game. You're able to change it because people are unlikely to have played the Gothic Game yesterday. People are unlikely to have played Fireball Island, the original game, the day before that Kickstarter came out.
Yeah, I think it's about how much time has elapsed, but also about access to that game for sure. I think TI is a really interesting example because, yeah, if they hadn't been iterating on a routine basis between editions, actually maybe we would class that, if it was a bigger jump, maybe we would class that as a remake. Because actually, if you take first edition and then where we're currently at, I think you probably would notice some significant jumps. For us, our game is made like nearly 30 years after the original version. So it means that huge jump, so much has changed in the industry and what we expect from tabletop games now, that we're able to really add so much more to the game because other people before us have done those iterations, but on different products, but nobody has iterated on the game that we're working on.
Yeah, and so presumably there's a bit more liberty. And just so I've shared some link in the comments where hopefully people can check out more things from BlackLetter Games and all the social medias. We'll go through that again at the end. And I do play video games. I think it's almost inevitable that if you play any form of games, you're probably going to be interested in other styles of games. But for whatever reason, this is a wee bit of a tangent, but I do not like Tabletopia or Tabletop Simulator that much, or even... at this point, even if I play Board Game Arena right now, it's just a reminder of the fact that I would love to be playing these games with people, and I can't. And so I would far rather just play a mobile phone game and listen to some podcasts or play Life is Strange, or yeah, maybe I might fire up the SNES at some points in the future. I've still not done it whilst I've been up here. Not turned on this TV. I hope it works.
The way that we thought that television might kill radio, I think that Tabletopia and those other sort of simulation environments are sort of just becoming their own separate thing, because as you've described, it isn't the same as sitting across from other human beings, but it also isn't the same as playing just a cold, its own separate video game experience. I think it's more of a marketing tool for a lot of people as well. The fact that games on tabletop simulation platforms now are largely across the board free, a lot of people are using them to iterate, to using them for play testing, and using them to help market their game before the game comes out. I mean, Gloomhaven, with its latest expansion that was on Kickstarter last year, I think is a fantastic example where people were going in every day for new challenges that they put up on their tabletop simulator version, so that they could test out some of the cards and check that they were fine and working, but also help those little puzzles helped create a marketing campaign for the game. It was a fantastic idea.
I want to have another wee tangent. Based on what we were talking about before we started recording and what you just said about involving people and what Kickstarter has maybe become. Because, yeah, you were talking about how given, if you want, I'll actually, rather than try and quote you can put it into your own words about the cost of the art and how it has become a pre-order system, and it is almost expected that you do have the artwork and everything there. And certainly for Categorical, which at the time I said, hey, it's going to be done by January 2021, and a couple of months ago I said, look, it's just not going to happen. It's been a difficult year for me, and people were very understanding, and I'm still working on it. But yeah, that is one of the possibilities, especially if you're a 1 or 1.5 person company, essentially, working on a single game. And
yeah, it's a really tough old world out there for people who are working in very small teams, particularly if you're largely pulling all the load of the game yourself. There's a hell of a lot to do. There's a hell of a lot.
But you were talking about the cost of the art and how it's a wee bit weird, how this giant cost has to be decided before we go to Kickstarter. Because right now, the only decision that Kickstarter is really helping people with is how many copies do I print?
Yeah.
And with a video game, it's interesting because video games are still at the point where the game hasn't been programmed, the game hasn't been developed. And so, hey, this is what I'm hoping for. And if you give us money, we will spend some years making this game. Now, with a board game, it's gotten to the point where people expect that all the art's been done, all the development's been done. But it's like, hey, if you give us money, then, okay, stretch goal, we will now add this extra bit. And that's why a lot of the expansions just aren't as good. I'm not going to point any fingers, but I'm just going to say, yeah, if there's something that needed time and development to be worked upon, then it needs time to be developed. Because, and yeah, you were talking about the price of the art. Can you repeat what you said before we started?
Yeah, I was saying about how it can really be a cart before the horse situation now, because once upon a time in the early days when Kickstarter barely even had board games on it, I was on specifically as a filmmaker, and a lot of people would have up, concept art and stuff, and that would be about it. You would be bringing basically pitch materials to an online environment to say, hey, would you guys like to get involved in our project and help support us financially? Then you would go and make the film. But now we've moved to a point where, like you've said, the game is expected to be honest, 90% of the way done. And the biggest cost really with a lot of games, although the development is a very long and can be costly, one of the biggest costs that I've found from my experience with working on games is artwork and physical components being manufactured, from testing we're currently in a process of testing out miniatures at the moment, whether we're going to have standees, cardboard standees, whether we're going to have 3D miniatures, whether we're going to have those sculpted and printed, whether we're going to have acrylic standees. That has a huge cost implication just for getting the sculpts done, as let alone getting the concept art and getting them physically made. But those things, actually, if you look online on Kickstarter now, those are what we come to expect. Kickstarter is built largely on a model of having miniatures games now, but we have come to expect to see those miniatures unequivocally. But actually, those are one of the largest cost implications that you should really be using Kickstarter to fund. But what this is doing is it's meaning that a lot of companies are sort of getting into this multiple stack situation where one Kickstarter is paying for a previous Kickstarter, and then so on back further down the stack, because they already need to have had the financial investment so that they can have the miniatures sculpted or printed in some cases, so that they can show people for their Kickstarter. Whereas once upon a time, the Kickstarter was to get those funds in the first place. So I think it's a bit of a cart before the horse situation. I think it's quite scary that things are moving in that direction. I think what it does is it pushes out a lot of creativity, and it encourages people to really move to quite similar models. It surprised me that it hasn't moved the industry into having games that require less art. But in the same way that I spoke about Instagram before, certain platforms are very popular because they're very visual. We're moving increasingly into a very increasingly visual environment where we want to see more imagery, more vivid imagery, things that look better on phones, which have higher contrast. Video, we want more sound increasingly because more people are using better stereo systems. And those things all have cost implications to them. It's very expensive to make a Kickstarter video, for example. But what it does is it pushes out those games which are perhaps very, very good ideas but need large cash injections. And it also pushes out games that necessarily wouldn't need large art, like slightly less visual games. And I think it's moving a lot of those people to work with publishers. Those designers are moving to sell their games through publishers, where they're then losing a lot of the rights to their work. They're losing a lot of the money that really should be going to them. One of my favorite games from the last few years is The Mind. The Mind is an absolutely incredible card game that has almost no art to it whatsoever. It boggles my brain how good that game is, but it has like 4 pieces of artwork to it. You could never put that on Kickstarter because it's just simply not visual enough.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack about what you just said. Firstly, I agree with you that it's really interesting how, I mean, I come from the perspective of, what some people might cite like a punk rock mentality, where it's not like my games are particularly edgy or punk rocky, but it's very much me. I mean, sure, I had a lot of help from Denim to get Kitty Cataclysm and Wibble Plus Plus Deluxe out of the door, now known as the LDEC. I say it's now known as the LDEC, but I've still not printed a version that says the LDEC on it. But hey ho. Anyway, I still did the design development. Of course, there's people helping me immeasurably with playtesting and everything. And Alphabetical was from someone else in that version. And I'm trying to think what else was. And Alphabetical was actually had another significant rules change from yet another person. But then when it came to putting the final files into it, yeah, by virtue of just Denim doing that wee bit of work of scanning these things and putting them into the digital format, it helps me along the way. And having Chris, help me each week, even though currently we aren't able to actually physically meet, so it's not as helpful as it might be. Because frankly, yeah, if I were able to say, okay, here's the physical things, now go off and do the scanning and sort these things out, then... But hopefully, within a month, we will be able to see each other again and get that stuff sorted. In the point, but yeah, this is a kind of punk rock style of, okay, I do the art, I've written the words, I've done all these things. And sure, the L deck, I want that to move away from being just me. I want to move that towards, okay, someone else makes the games, like Sate and Alex, who I believe are still in chat. I mean, unless I just assume that people are, especially with those, I assume they're kind of lurking, if not. And yeah, no, they're not in chat apparently. So there we go. And so yeah, they recently won the 2020 LDEC contest, and certainly for Couple, which is a game that I developed and I designed, but I'm talking to Miles Atkinson, who is doing lovely graphics, and I might actually show one of the letters tomorrow. That's now, we've gone through so many iterations of this painting, and Miles has finally come up with something. It's like, yeah, that works. And Miles is able to do the other 25 letters that's a similar standard and is now cracking on with it. And I know it doesn't sound like that much, but, you know, even though these, you can put a lot of love and labor into a letter, if you know what I mean. And so having, then on the other hand, there's categorical, something from someone else. But sorry, this, I don't just want this just to be self-promoting, but when we look at Kitty Cataclysm, that's my art, my thing. And when I look at, okay, I've got this idea for a poetry thing, I might honestly even make it UK only, just to simplify it. Just go in, do all the arts ahead of time and say, this is what you're going to get. I am going to do a print-on-demand version of this, and it's not even going to come in a proper box. I'm genuinely thinking, I know this sounds really, really cheap, and it is. It's purely for cost. It's going to come in a little plastic bag instead of a box. So there will be a card at the front that tells you what the game is, a card at the back that's kind of like the back of the box, and that is it. So it's like just a deck in a bag, because it's literally print on demand, and you know print on demand is super expensive. So in order to be able to justify the cost, I can't even put it in a top box. And then I'm going to be like, this is the minimum price it can be, send it out, get it in those little thin envelopes, and ship it around the UK. And if it's like 50 copies, then great, frankly. And that's all I want to do sometimes. But when it comes to a real thing, how can you get people involved if we are leaving people in Kickstarter out of that original bit? If we're not involving them until we're ready at the point where, well, all the art, all the graphic design, all the development has been done. The only thing left to decide is how many we print. I mean, that's a viable way to go. But are you at risk of losing all the input that you could have had? Are you at risk of, sure, Alleycat Games or Stonemeyer Games at this point can have a lot of playtesters. They have enough of a reputation that people can be like, hey, you're remaking this game, great. We will join you, but along the way, are you at risk of losing this big audience that you could have had? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's in my mind at least, there are the three kinds of company that you can work with from my mind and my experience. Those three being you have your big Simons of the world, your big companies who are these huge behemoths who will put out regular Kickstarter releases like clockwork and have these huge titles. That's one of them. Those big powerhouses. I think there's also your very small, very agile teams who are able to work like yourself and be able to be very punk rock and build an audience like you're doing and bring people together and make it more of a movement, more of an experiential thing. I've got a lot of time for that. That's where I like to sit. Those are the people I like to work with. And then there's the third one, which I think is sort of somewhere between. And those are the people who can really struggle. And those people are, you can have individuals who can be very, very prolific, who want to do all the things themselves potentially, but people who want to have production value that meets the big boys, but has the sensibility of the indies. And I think that middle ground is the hardest one to be in right now. I think that it can be very, very time consuming and very draining for those kind of creatives, because you can't compete with that huge production schedule. You can't compete, like you said earlier, with hordes of playtesters who can perfectly grind a card out until it's perfect form. But also you can't be agile enough and punk rock enough to have that movement behind you who say, actually, oh, we've submitted some artwork, or we'd like to get involved with being able to help with this thing. one of the last games that I worked on, a game called Pet Evil, and we specifically tried to have things that were very inclusive and very very involving and engaging for people. On our Kickstarter release, we built a rocket on the actual day of the launch of the game, because our game was about sending rockets and blowing each other up, because we thought that would be a fun community thing. So if we got our community to a certain point, then that's where we thought we would get to. So we released a video where we launched a rocket off, and it was something that was fun for us, and it helped us as creatives have something that we could be working towards. But it was also fun for the community. Now, you aren't going to get that kind of thing from your Simons of the world. They don't need that. They don't need to have that. But it meant that for us, where we were building that community around, we had a team who basically said, "Oh, if you'd like, we can translate the game into Chinese for you. We'd be interested in a Chinese translation of the game. We as a community would like to help do that with you." And those are those opportunities that you get that open up because you're able to be engaging with people and build people around with that punk rock sensibility. It goes back to the core of punk rock, right? As a music movement, is like, actually, we're going to be engaging and do something interesting, but we're going to make it a movement rather than just say every 6 months a new record comes out and this is where the world tour is going to be. Like, it's a very, they're not to say that either model is correct, they're very different, but it also means that you get different games that sit within them. And as a creative, I'm really interested in the games that straddle those two worlds, when you have indies who are making games that have no right being indie games, or companies who are big AAA companies who are making games that, to be honest, should end with that weird grey space that sits in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a question. I mean, I guess what I was dodging around the question of is basically like, is a focus on a particular style of marketing worsening the games? Because ultimately you might focus on what's required for the sake of the marketing rather than what's required to make the game itself the best thing possible, whether it is the way that Kickstarter goes, or I guess this could be applied to anything. It's not just about Kickstarter. It could be the way that we need to engage people on Instagram. You mentioned picking colors that work well on a screen. I mean, does there come a point where it's like, you know what, we're focusing too much on the marketing, and yes, that's letting us sell more copies, but it's making the game itself a bit worse.
I think I'll give an example. Our designer Chris, I think I'm okay talking about this. One of the ideas that he's got for another project that he might move into, I'll be very careful where I tread with talking about his ideas for stuff. But he's talking about doing a project which, instead of us trying to sell hundreds, potentially thousands of copies, his goal is to sell like 50 copies. And we have something where actually we aren't going to mass market this to loads of people. We're just going to make this one thing. And the idea is to make a thing that is very, very small, that has huge production values, where we say, look, this is a really small box game, but for most small box games, you wouldn't have the funding to say, improve card quality, for example. But for this, we're specifically going to make a point of making an unusual project where it's a small box game that has ridiculously high production values. So this small box game, instead of having these really cheap cards or very light dice, we're going to have really, really heavy dice, because that's not a thing that you get from a small box game. And we aren't interested in selling this to everybody, because it isn't for everybody. It has that punk rock sensibility of like, we're just interested in selling this to the people that are interested in the thing, that want to play the thing. Because games are made to be played and slit open and put in front of people. That's the exciting thing, rather than just...
Yeah, and I've got lots of time. Again, I'm going to use your phrase back at you, for people who are making something for the joy of making it, because they want it to exist. Not everything. And I keep saying this, like, if I had in any board game design 101 talk that I've done, and I think there was a time when I did it at about like 6-7 conventions, each time changing it a wee bit. And bye, Alex, it was lovely to have you. And yeah, it's But yeah, number one that I say is what's everyone to do is okay. I mean, okay, as long as you aren't hurting anyone without their prior consent. But fundamentally, if you want to make a game, like one copy of a game as a declaration of love, I think we should have more of that. Like, just, okay, what's the best game that I could make for this one person that I love? Maybe that is a reskin of something that you've already made, but like it has a lot more, you know, in-jokes woven in. Maybe like a print-on-demand version where there, like, maybe you handcraft a box, and like the physical craft work that goes into it is as much about the game design, but it's kind of like the way that you would maybe shoot and edit a home video just for your family. You might do something like that, or you might paint a picture for your mum. Why not have something like that where you make a game and you make it specifically for a really tiny audience? Or indeed, even if you want to get it out there to people that you've never met, like, you know what, I just want this thing to exist. And as long as, yeah, I'm all over that.
I'll have a brief tangent here. Part of the reason I'm in Bristol is because I'm a video producer, video editor, and I work with performers. And there's a huge community for physical performers here in Bristol. And one of over the Christmas period, one of the things that I filmed was I'm friends with a group who do acrobatic walkabouts for events, dressed as vaudevillian strongmen. And we filmed a video where not only were they being their vaudevillian strongman act, but they'd been hired to do the vaudevillian strongman act, dressed with a Christmas theme. And on top of that, they have a 1970s disco Santa. So they have these three separate layers of, not only is it a vaudevillian strongman acro act, it's also Christmas themed with elves and Santa. And on top of that, it's 1970s disco themed with big chains and a big afro on Santa. And there's these multiple layers of, this is very, very niche, but I love how specific and niche that is, because the people who, the audience that is for, that's going to, the business that they were helping to entertain over that Christmas period, like, that's so specific. Those people are going to have so much more enjoyment because of how specific it is for them. The idea that that is tailor-made for a specific job like that, that really warms me. That so much love, and love is a big thing that we've spoken about. We keep using this word, but so much love and care and spirit has been put into something for the benefit of other people or for their audience.
I get, you know, this is back in the day. When I say back in the day, I mean a couple of months ago, before I decided, you know what, I'm going to allow myself to carry on a bit more if I want to, because trying to get the joy back into my shows, I'd be like, okay, I would like to start wrapping up, you know, even if it's not right on the dot. It has been a really good chat. I would like to maybe, whether you want to talk about potential pitfalls or maybe some sorts of tips for someone who's, let's assume that they've done their homework. Let's assume that they've gotten the rights to that IP of the original game, or maybe it's their own thing from the past. Maybe, I don't know. It's Richard Brees is watching and wants to remake I don't know, like, what was the first Key game? Someone help me out here. Sorry, Richard. But, or let's say you've got your IP, you've got rights to that, you want to do it, you've got people who are good at making games. How specifically towards a game that's based on something where you're trying to keep the spirit alive, how can you balance that spirit of the old with the refreshing it? How can you do it all well?
So certainly in my opinion, and this is obviously my opinion, what we have done and what I think that others should strive to do is you choose what your battle lines are. You choose your lines and what you wish to hold on to. You take what the core tenets of that product are, of what that experience was for you. And we spoke about nostalgia at the beginning of this. You want to take what those things were that were shiny and exciting for you the first time that you played that game or you heard that thing. take those, you write those things down, and you assess why you want to hold them near and dear to you. So for us in our game, that was player elimination, so that you had the high stakes. That was being able to keep a sense of narrative and story. We knew that we wanted to keep it about Dracula and about horror tropes and about folklore. We wanted all those things, and so you draw those lines and you assess why you want to stick with them, so that you know the value to you. And then I think you go back to your research, you go back to your audience, and then you assess why it's important to them, and you check, is this important to them? Is this something that other players experience as well? Is this just me being crazy, or is this what other people like about that experience? And then you work towards that, because then you've got what your spirit is of the game. You've got that core spirit. If you're working closely with the original creator, then that's great. It means that you can understand what their spirit was and what their intent was. But also you can check that you're going along the same line for what the audience wants and what the audience experience. And then you can stop pouring as much love into it as possible. I think doing it well is about pouring as much resource into whatever it is that you're working on creatively. For us, that means pouring as much time, emotional investment into a thing that you love and hold dear to you, and that you want to see being able to be presented for other people, so that they can have that first experience that you had in a new and beautiful, blossomed way.
Yeah, I think that is a really good point. And I mean, I keep coming back to Magic the Gathering, but in a sense, they are not only remaking their own game with every single set, but when they're going back and revisiting Ravnica, for example, or going back to Innistrad. And yeah, I know that Mark Rosewater talked a lot about what you've just said. What is the key spirit? What was in the original? What will you keep? But you need to bring something fresh. So at the same time, you need to get rid of something, but then the needs of a game remake aren't exactly the same as the needs of a Magic the Gathering revisiting. That's almost its own beast again, where, you know, frankly, if they didn't have at least 2-3 new mechanisms when they went back to Innistrad or Ravnica or Zendikar or whatever, well, people would be up in arms. But of course, if, you know, you do Fireball Island, it doesn't need to be, whoa, you can choose where the people go. It doesn't have to be like a big named thing. It's just, okay, you play cards, but it's not that the cards are there to add something new. It's about going back and being like, okay, what is the spirit? And you talked about that player elimination, even if it's not okay by modern standards. And so that's really interesting to ponder on. I'm sure that we could, you know, talk in circles and have a lovely bladder and talk for more until the cows come home, figuratively speaking. And I'm never entirely sure what that even means. I mean, when do the cows come home? Is it just before winter?
It's 5 p.m. after a long work day.
I don't know. I think that the cows stay in the fields longer than that.
Not where you are. It's snowing where you are. I imagine there's almost no cow about at all.
Yeah, that's true. I've not been out in the fields for a while. But no, this has been a lovely chat. I am just going to share my links there while I do the quick recap. And so, what have we talked about today? We've talked about remaking games. We've talked about nostalgia. We talked about MCM Comic Con, Insomnia, and sharing board games with new folk. We talked about self-promotion. We had a long tangent about that and coming on to shows what people's motivations are. We talked about what the definition is, and we kind of settled on, does it need to be loving? Like, maybe there does, ideally there should be some love, but you can also have cynical remakes for sure. But I think that's going to be reflected potentially. But it is fundamentally about making meaningful changes to what I would say is a main version, i.e. marketed as the main version of the game, not the more advanced version, not a spin-off, not a version rethemed around a city when there's still the main version. It's like actually updating the whole main version. We had a shout out for Drac Borgen, which I will definitely have to check out. Reasons why you might want to do it. It comes down to money, of course it does. It's built-in audience. It's going to, you're starting with something that's already at least got some level of goodness. You don't have to worry about, hey, is this even a good game or not? You can see that it's got these years, decades, if not, well, I don't think we're at the point where if it's centuries, then it wouldn't really be a remake. It would be like adapting a classic game at that point. But sure, it can have like decades of people who've been playing this and saying, yes, we love this. And there's a reason for that because the game already has some quality. From a personal point of view, maybe it's because you want to put your own stamp on it. From other people's points of view, it's because they want to explore the original in a new way. It's because you want to have more great things in the world. And yeah, if I love games and there's a great game from 1989, well, it's probably still a great game. We had a lot of chat about Twister and jokes about how that could go. Having conversations around things. We talked about how the first version of the game was LARPed. We talked a wee bit about video games, about Kickstarter, and whether marketing is worsening these games, about reaching out to your community to make sure. And I guess that's something we didn't really get into, but for sure, even if you're not on Kickstarter, you need to somehow reach out to your audience and do that work of, hey, can we get your inputs on the lore? Can we get your inputs on what we're doing? And even though that's actually a really nice thing for a remake, that you are likely to have people already invested, because let's say game designer 21 who has never made a game before is producing a new game, people are unlikely to put a lot of time and efforts into them. At this point, sure, if I, even like at the points where I am, if I say, hey, I'm making a new version of Yogi, can people join me in that? This was like maybe in 2018, I want to say, when I started making the new version of Yogi. And there were like maybe, I think, 3 people who in the end actually gave me feedback. I maybe like now there'd be a few more people because it's been out for a few more years. And with every passing year, what I've learned is it's not really about the designers so much, although there's a little bit of that. It's more about what that individual game is. Because just because I like Matt Leacock's game doesn't mean that I'm going to like everything that Matt Leacock makes. I mean, hi, Matt Leacock. Matt Leacock's great individual, play-tested, Phrasal, and I think there's a design credit because Matt Leacock was the person who suggested splitting cards in 2 ways, which, yeah, it's obvious, but anyway. But the point is, when you've got an old game, you're more likely to get people to enter and embrace that and put in their own feedback. And finally, it's about love, care, and what is the spirit of that old game, and finding that spirit, but also, as you said, moving from nostalgia to having that caveat of not being beholden to it. Yes, there are going to be some sacred cows, but if the game is a farmland, then you've got to kill a few of these cows, because maybe some of these cows, even if the whole, it's like really the farm that's sacred.
Oh no!
In this metaphor, it's
my connection as well. Oh,
in
God.
This metaphor, it's the farm that's sacred, and the cows are, you know, they're just there. The cows are lovely. The cows are great, but you want to maybe not all the cows should remain. I know that's a really weird. Love that reaction to Frozen Bears.
Wow, all the time for us to lose connection. We nearly went there right at the end.
But yeah, that was our recap. So did we say anything else that you would like to briefly mention again in our summary?
I think we covered pretty much everything. The big thing that I wanted to talk about to make sure that people had recap was Twister, because I think we came up with some really good Twister stuff.
Well, you say we, but it was really everyone in chat.
Oh, when I say we, I'm saying we as in the chat, as in community. There was some fantastic stuff.
Yeah. You know what? Maybe that's a bad reflection, because it's like, yeah, you know what? It is a we. Like, that's a really nice sentiment, and maybe that's yeah, it's slightly damning that I didn't. Yeah, I should think of it more as a, yeah, we, because it's almost like, hey, yeah, once you are here, it's like you're part of this show, but and who is we? Is it like we? Anyway, chat gone wild as always, says Xate. Anyway, so that is the end. If you want to check me out, I am stuffbybez.com. My website, it's not very good. Stuffbybez.bigcartel.com. If you want to buy my stuff, twitter.com/stuffbybez. Check there for the most tweets and information. Instagram.com/stuffbybez for daily-ish pictures. Twitch.tv/stuffbybez. I stream every day at 10 a.m. UK time. YouTube.com/stuffbybez for the old shows, and stuffbybez.com/discord. If you're not already on the Discord, we have channels for talking about design, for talking about just things that are making you happy, and for sharing pictures of cats. And we also now have a music channel where you can share if you have a favorite time signature. Why not tell us? My favorite time signatures are 5/4 and 7/4. Do you have a favorite time signature, Benji?
7/8.
7/8. Yeah, I can dig it.
It's really hard to rap in.
That sounds like a challenge. I'm not going to try it now. I feel like I'd need some kind of right. But anyway, if you want to check out everything from Benji, then please tell us, where do you most like to be found?
I most like to be found in person. But in lieu of being able to be met in person, you can find me, Benji Corless, and all the work that I do for BlackLetter Games at blacklettergames.com. We have a mailing list, which is where you can find all of our exciting news. We're on Board Game Geek. We're on Facebook. I like to talk with people on Twitter. Twitter is fun. I like Twitter a lot. But if you're interested in our stuff, we're everywhere on all the social media feeds. And we specifically have all sorts of cool stuff. I've got a Spotify playlist for the game, so check that out. We have a cool Instagram stuff looking through our art from Hugh Teo. I like making content and putting it out to the world. So find us on all the social media platforms. But blacklettergames.com is where you can find us. And you can find our game hitting Kickstarter in spring 2021.
That's this year.
That is this year, and I cannot believe that it's this year. I watched Blade Runner again over the weekend, and it was horrifying to see it was set years ago rather than years in the future.
When is it set?
It's set in like 2019.
Okay.
It's really scary.
There you go. You've got at least one new follower. And Thank you, Nicholas. And while I'm saying thank you to Nicholas, this is the moment when I like to say thank you to everyone who has been here for this stream. It has been lovely to have you all. Whether it's Benji over here, getting in touch and bringing this topic to my attention and saying, hey, how about this? And I was like, yeah, you know what, that sounds like a good topic. Or whether it's Xate being the most amazing moderator, or all the other people watching. Now is the point where either I start. Okay, special shouts outs to Rob, jumped in, Carterly, and Aquasulis, of course, and Elaine, who was here earlier, Javier, who I can't actually see who's watching. It's Instagram. It's interesting. Man, I am not wording today very well. It's interesting. because on Twitch, if you go into Twitch, you can sort of say, oh, I wonder who's watching, and then you see a lot of the people, but you can't do anything like that. Oh, Bones and Banners, and everyone who was joining in the conversation. Thank you, everyone, and so.
Yeah, thank you everybody thank you for having me on, firstly. And thank you to everybody in the chat, everybody for welcoming me and for asking questions. It's been really, really fun. So thank you all for making me feel so included.
You have been wonderful. And so, yep. If you want to check out the next stream, oh, now is the time when I sing. Over to you. What are you up to? You can share anything you want to. So if anyone has anything you want to share, anything that you're looking forward to, maybe it's hopes and ambitions, something you want to get done, maybe it's a meal that you're about to eat. I have already eaten today. There was a while, to be fair, I kind of skipped dinner last night, but yeah, I might have a wee snack after this, but not like a big lunch like I often do, because it's a kind of, after the stream, quite often it's breakfast and lunch combined. But I already had a bit of cereal with some nuts and a couple of bananas to keep me going. But yeah, other than that, again, for the rest of this week, just because of the way things are, I'm allowing myself to take it a little bit easy. And yeah, I don't really have much to share. I apologize.
Who are you streaming with tomorrow?
Well, you talk about your stuff, and then I'll go into my streams afterwards.
Oh, okay. It was me providing an excellent segue. Well, thank you. So, like I say, the thing that I'm most looking forward to, we have our Kickstarter coming out. So I'm working really, really hard on trying to get everybody aware of that and making as much content for that as possible. So that's largely what my week looks like, is doing awful work stuff, but I don't want to sound all pluggy. So I suppose the things I'm looking forward to are spending more time promoting the thing that I'm on. So I'm going to silence my mouth.
No, feel free to tell us about that real world stuff. Sate says that surprising no one. Sate is playing The Crew with some friends online today. So there you go.
Meet Space Friends. That's what I'm missing. Meet Space Friends.
I'm assuming online people, but Sate did actually say online. Also, Twitch friends. Those are my realest ones these days. Oh, there you go. So apparently real friends are friends that will play The Crew with Sate. Those are the real friends. So if you want to, it's like, if you want to be Sate's friend, then you've got to play The Crew. I don't know if you're ready for this initiation. Have you played The Crew?
You know, I've not played The Crew. I'm not part of The Crew.
Ah. Well, I mean, theoretically, maybe after your work, I'm sure that I will happily join anyone to play The Crew. We have confirmation. So Benji, if you would like to try The Crew on Board Game Arena, I know at least one person who's quite into playing it with pretty much anyone.
I've just done a Google because I was thinking of The Crew as the racing game. There's two games called The Crew. There's a board game by Cosmos, and there's a racing game called The Crew. So I was thinking of the racing game. Which one does he mean?
She?
I do apologize. I do apologize.
But yeah, Sate is talking about the recent Cosmos game, The Crew, which I've got here. There we go.
I love Cosmos stuff.
So there we go.
I'm going to put some research into this. Well, thank you. There's my research to be doing. We were talking about Dragonborg, and now I have The Crew. That's my homework.
Well, I mean, are you wanting to be? Sorry, this is a running gag because the name is Will Cook for Board Games, specifically because Xate will literally cook for board games. But hence the chocolate tarts. Although, I mean, there's a question: is chocolate making? Is that cooking? I mean, what's his cooking? Is it cooking? Anyway.
Well, cooking chocolate is its own thing, separately.
Just don't play the crew with 2 players. I don't know. I've heard good things about it. I know that Xate doesn't like it, but I've heard other people saying good things. But yeah, anyway. The family name is Mac, not Cook. There we go. So there we go. But the name is Xate, not Will. And so, yep. If anyone wants to share anything, then feel free to share. For my next streams, you can look at stuffbybez.com/streams. I deleted a couple of things from next week because, yeah, I don't want to subject too many people to my terrible internet after yesterday. That was quite annoying. So, yeah, I'm going to have some more chaotic shenanigans next week. On Tuesday, we will probably have musical shenanigans. Tomorrow is going to be the Friendly Friday Forum, and that's just everyone is welcome to pop on screen every Friday. Again, just to make this clear, as long as I trust you, you are welcome to come on screen. So basically, if I've seen your name in chat, if I've got a sense of who you are, even if you've just popped in a couple of times before, if I'm like, you know, this person seems cool, then come on and join us. And it's just everyone can join in. We can have up to 10 people on screen, and just like a big manic thing. Last week we were joined by Brian from Tabletop Polish, and we were joined by Michael from Idle Michael, who makes such games as I think Michael worked on Blank a wee bit, I'm not sure, but definitely worked on Fox and Chicken, great game, and also Holding on Troubled's Life of Billy Kerr.
Oh, cool. That's really
Saturday, cool. I'll be meeting Dutch Yoda. Sunday, I'll be reviewing a couple of things, possibly not board games. I might review at least. I might think about doing all of them in one go. Like, say to people, hey, is this a charity stream you would like to see? Could I raise some money for some good cause? I don't know. It also feels like a wee bit of a weird... I'll probably be reviewing the comics I've read, podcasts, and maybe trying to explain wider some sort of board game related lesson from them if I can. Yeah, as I mentioned, Monday's chaotic shenanigans, and I will sort out all the things. But that has been lovely. If you want, share, spread the word, and I will. We don't have any money. I don't get this. Was I asking for money? I get that this is a...
Oh, charity. We spoke about charity stream.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, but it feels like as soon as I start getting into video game stuff, that's like a different crowd, isn't it?
Yeah, quite possibly. You're probably right.
Like, it feels like I could start it up, and then, you know, there was that one time when I changed the stream to be music, and instantly, from the time that I changed it to be music, I got like about 10 more, 20 people more joining within a few minutes. And I was like, wow, I guess this is what happens when you change the stream to be music, because normally it's talk shows and podcasts, which apparently is quite bad for discoverability, if that's a word.
Yeah.
And yeah, if there's like some sort of I don't know, tag or category on Twitch for retro gaming, I assume there is.
I would guess there probably is.
Maybe it would be like, okay, I'm reviewing literally all these games in this order. This is like, maybe spend a few hours typing the list of all the game names of all the games that I have. be like, yeah, I'll go through all of these, and as long as, I don't know, it feels like a thing that could work as a completely separate thing. Anyway, it's not top of my priority list by any means. I don't want to keep making more work for myself. But yeah, if you're watching this live, this is when I am going to go into the Twitch browser and check if anything cool is happening, and check if Idle Michael is playing around. And it says, I will not be around that day to mod. Have to wash my hair. That is totally fair and understandable. And so, is Idle Michael already going, Xate? Yeah. Okay. So raid Idle Mikael. Okay, let's do that to our friend Idle Michael. And if you want, you can copy paste part of that thing. And for now, there is only one thing left to do. And that one thing left to do is to say, unless you've got any final words, Benji?
Berlin Twister.
Bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. This is the end of the show. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye, 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 bye. This is a goodbye song. Bye, 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 bye. Thank you for watching along. Bye, 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 bye. Thankful to all you know. Bye, 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 bye. And now it's time to go. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, everyone.
See you guys.
Yeah. So there we go. Bye-bye. 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 Bye. Bye-bye. 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 Bye-bye.